Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Anthony Moreno. Welcome to a special edition of Your Legislators right here on KRWG Public Media. Our guest today is a first-generation Mexican-American who was raised in the borderlands. He is a former Las Cruces City Councilor and recently addressed New Mexico lawmakers in Santa Fe on his priorities as Congressman of New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District. Please welcome Democratic U.S. Representative Gabe Vasquez. Thank you for joining us, Congressman.
Thanks so much, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning.
I'd like to hear from you to start off.
Sure.
What inspired you to run for this position?
First, I just got to say that I'm humbled to have this opportunity to serve not just this district, but this country, because as a first-generation American, as you mentioned, I've always felt a weight on my shoulders to give something back to the opportunities that I've been afforded, both by this country, but also by my family. You know, coming in from Ciudad Juarez, just right across the border, having the privilege of American citizenship, I've always felt like I should use that opportunity to do something to help serve the community that has helped me so much. And so I've mentioned this to the New Mexico State Legislature just recently, but I said, it was you, it was New Mexico, it was the folks that look like me, it was the folks in our community that made me believe I could also serve. Now, growing up in the borderlands and here in Las Cruces, having the opportunity to be a city councilor, you think that sometimes you have solutions that maybe haven't been thought about in Congress, or that perhaps you could do a good job representing your community. And so my work here at the very local level, patching potholes, fixing broken street lamps, working on animal control ordinances, I knew that I was connected to this community, and I knew the Southwest and the Southeast. And of course, we have now the South Valley of Albuquerque in our district. So representing this part of New Mexico is something that just comes natural to me because I grew up here, I know these communities, and so it's just a strong desire to give back to my state and to my country.
Now, when you address the legislature, one of the issues that you mentioned being a top priority is the Farm Bill. Can you share with us how important the Farm Bill is to the 2nd Congressional District and our country?
Absolutely. The Farm Bill gets reauthorized every 5 years, and so we have an opportunity to reauthorize programs that are so important. Everything from child nutrition, so SNAP benefits for our families, which we have a lot of recipients here, to housing in rural places, right? Places like Hatch or places like our colonias in southern Doña Ana County. Rural housing development dollars that come in are authorized by the Farm Bill. Now, our agricultural industry, of course, is a staple. It's a legacy of who we are. We are the green chili and the red chili state, right? Don't want to make anyone mad, so we'll call it both. But the programs that get authorized to help everything from determining the price of dairy, for our farmers down in Vado and Mesquite, to helping support improvements for some of our onion farmers and our livestock producers. A lot of those programs get worked out in the Farm Bill. So to keep agriculture alive in the Rincon Valley, here in the Mesilla Valley, in Hatch, and other places throughout our district, in Lemitar and Socorro, and even for our urban farmers, that Farm Bill is the key for the next 5 years for us to make sure we have the funding and the support for local farmers to survive and to thrive.
You mentioned a lot of issues there within the Farm Bill, so I want to talk about one issue. I've been out in the fields through reporting, talking with farmers, talking with workers. Farmers are concerned that their workforce is aging out. What are some things you think that federal lawmakers like yourself can do?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because as we've been visiting farmers across the district, and in fact, my State of the Union guest was Mr. Dale Gillis of Gillis Farms from Array, New Mexico. A little, onion shed that I used to pass by when I went fishing at Percha Dam when I was a kid. And I got to meet the Gillises, and the number one concern they have is workforce. I said, we're just not getting the workers that we used to. And of course, that includes folks here domestically in places like Hatch, but also temporary guest workers that come during harvest seasons or during planting seasons. We've heard that from every producer, whether it's our dairy folks or whether it's our livestock community. So some of the things that I'm looking to do is to help expand and tweak the H-2A visa program. That is a program that allows agricultural workers to come and support our agricultural industry. That has been very successful in the absence of the workforce workforce that we truly need for our ag industry. And so I'm looking to work with Republicans in Texas actually to help support a bipartisan effort to help bring more workers that are willing to come here, they're willing to work hard, but also that lessen some of the red tape for some of the producers that we have here. And some of the solutions are housing, right? We need to be able to have housing for our workers while they're here, because what we need to make sure not to do is repeat some of the mistakes of the past. You know, the Bracero program and others that often treated some of our workers very unfairly. We need to make sure that if people are going to work in this country, that they have the dignity of working here. That means good housing, that of course means a good living wage, and all the other things that we would do to afford any American worker.
You mentioned SNAP as well, a program that a lot of folks in New Mexico depend on. 25% of the population using SNAP benefits. We're looking at around 47% of working families depending on SNAP benefits. That's according to the Center on Budget Priorities. So how can lawmakers really address this issue? Because there is a lot of growing concern in New Mexico about federal benefits expiring with SNAP.
Look, my colleagues across the aisle have targeted SNAP. They have targeted food assistance programs in the Farm Bill as Congress as a whole is talking about how to reduce the debt obligations that the country has to countries like China. And I think this is probably the worst place to look for a cut. I mean, you have Social Security, you have Medicare, you have food assistance. You have these really incredible programs that help Americans get back on their feet. In New Mexico, like you said, a fourth of our families depend on SNAP. We've made some great strides, some great changes to the program. For example, in making sure that local producers and folks like at our own farmers market here in Las Cruces can actually qualify to receive SNAP dollars so that local families can come and purchase fresh food, which increases the health of our population. We have, of course, increased SNAP benefits during the pandemic when people truly needed it the most because they were out of work. So I think in this Farm Bill, we have to continue that progress, protect SNAP at all costs and food assistance programs, and make sure that our local growers have even more of an access to be able to produce locally, and that includes in our schools as well. So I think we have to protect SNAP at all costs. A hungry child can't learn, and a hungry family can't thrive. I mean, that's just the bottom line. It's the basic need of being successful.
How does protecting SNAP also transition into helping our economy?
Well, as I mentioned, if you don't have children that are being educated, that aren't hungry at home, you're not going to have successful academic outcomes. That's the future of our workforce, right? Those young kids that are in our elementary school, that are in our high schools today, they're the folks that are going to be in our community colleges, in our trade schools. They need to have healthy upbringings. A good, nutritious meal is the least that we can do. It's the bottom, it's the floor of what we can do to make sure that they grow up in healthy environments. The same for our families. As we're struggling with inflation and the rising cost of a lot of different goods, families are having to make tough choices. And oftentimes, if you can get those benefits, if you can go to Casa de Peregrinos right here in Las Cruces and get a 50-pound box of food, that means that you might be able to pay your light bill on time, your electric bill on time. And so those SNAP benefits are so incredibly important for our community. Those folks won't be able to climb that ladder into the middle class if they don't have their basic needs met.
Economic development has been a big priority. You mentioned that in your speech to lawmakers. So can you share with me, what are your top priorities in addressing economic development?
Sure. So, we just finished talking with the folks up in Grant County about a trade school that they'd like to start right between the mining district communities of Bayard and Hurley. And this is actually something that Freeport-McMoRan, the mining company there, has agreed to support with the donation of land. What they'd like to do is get more of their workforce trained in the things that will help support the local industry. In this case, of course, copper mining is huge. We've seen that at Eastern College in Hobbs, their workforce training center that supports the oil and gas industry is producing local graduates, local folks who are welders, who are pipe fitters, who are truck drivers, who are supporting that industry directly, and they're making good money doing it. So I think investing in the trades is going to be critically important. For me, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, being able to expand and at least at the very minimum protect the jobs that we have that come from our research institutions, our national laboratories, of course, but also places like White Sands Missile Range and Holloman Air Force Base. I can't tell you how many Aggies I know, right, that graduated from this engineering college, that if they had the opportunity to go work at White Sands, or they had the opportunity to work at Holloman or NASA, that they stayed here in their communities, that they contributed to local economic development. They build healthy families, they buy houses. So I think for me, protecting those assets that we have, but expanding some of the missions, reinvesting in our labs, and also promoting the tech transfer part of the private side of things, right? So making sure that the research that is being undertaken at our national labs is being commercialized right here in New Mexico for private uses, so that we can have spin-off companies come from that. I strongly believe in that. Lastly, it's just the rising cost of goods. We have to make sure that we get a hold on inflation. We have a solution here, Anthony, and I think part of that is our inland port in Santa Teresa. We can ease our supply chain issues that we have in our domestic sealand ports, like California, where so much of the bottleneck has happened, that have risen the price of goods. We've seen the $500 million investment from Union Pacific down at the border, and what that did to help ease our supply chain issues 5 or 6 years ago. We can do more. Texas is not on good terms with their neighbors to the south, and in fact, the state of Chihuahua said, we'd like to build an international rail spur right here in Santa Teresa in New Mexico. So, think about how many jobs that creates, but also the ease of goods, the logistics jobs, the supply jobs, the trucking jobs, even light manufacturing that we can take as products are assembled in Mexico, and then the final assembly takes place here. I think we have a huge opportunity to grow jobs and also ease our supply chain issues and lower inflation.
Now, if we are working to grow jobs, what are some things that you think that New Mexico can address? What are some things as a federal lawmaker you think we need to address in this district to help those folks who want to be entrepreneurs, who want to expand their business, who are looking for qualified, skilled workers? What are some things that you think federal lawmakers can help out with?
Well, the Small Business Administrator is here in Las Cruces today, and I'm excited because we get to show her some of the best success stories of our local small businesses. And I'm excited to take her on a tour of downtown, eat at some local restaurants, and talk directly to business owners about some of those issues that they're facing. I think part of what we've seen is post-COVID, that recovery into stability for a small business has really been challenging for many small businesses because, we had over $40 billion of PPP loans here in New Mexico that really help support small, medium-sized businesses. Now that those dollars are gone, it's now having to deal with increases in minimum wage, right? And how do you deal with that as a small business? At the same time, how do we make sure that our workers are being paid fair wages? We also need to make sure that our local businesses have access to the federal procurement process. So businesses like Tresco, one of the largest employers here in Las Cruces, that do business with the federal government are able to employ hundreds of people because they have a great contract with some of our federal facilities. We can do that here with other small businesses that provide everything from web development services to janitorial services. So I think that's a big piece for us here in Las Cruces that we can do, working with the Small Business Administration, is get that training to small businesses so that they can apply for those contracts. And that includes, of course, some of our construction companies here locally. Secondly, is just making sure that technical trades training that I talked about earlier, that we have that available and that it's relevant for our community. Doña Ana Community College is so vital to making sure that we have a well-trained workforce, and so making sure that those dollars are flowing in on the federal side of things to those programs that are effectively impacting the growth of our workforce in very targeted ways, I think is incredibly important.
As a city councilor, I'm sure you dealt with the issue of helping small businesses. Some concerns that local businesses have voiced is too much red tape in the way to expand their business or to even start one. And they have had concerns about having to raise wages. Of course, New Mexico's taken some steps to increase the minimum wage. What do you think federal lawmakers can do to address that issue?
Well, first, I just got to say, I support well-paid workers in this district. I think working with dignity is incredibly important. And when we talk about the jobs of the future and the jobs that people really want, those are the jobs that allow you to afford an apartment or to buy a house, to pay for your children's child care, to have health insurance, to be able to repair your car, to buy a new car. If you are working 8 to 5 in this country and in this district, and you can't get those things done, then we are failing our workforce as a country. That's not the fault of the small businesses, right? There's so many factors at play there. However, I hear the small businesses loud and clear. At the state level, we have programs like JTIP that allow local small businesses that are just growing their workforce to have part of the wages of their workforce offset by a certain amount for a certain amount of time so that they can build that capital that they need to then be able to have enough money to be able to support the wages that they really want to pay. We've seen successful models all across New Mexico of people being paid good wages and business owners who are very successful. That doesn't apply to every industry equally, so I think we have to treat every industry differently. You know, there's a difference between an entry-level job in agriculture than there is working at a convenience store, for example. So I think we have to make sure that our policies at the federal level aren't tailored to fit every size of business and every type of business. We really need to make sure, like in the agriculture industry, for example, that we get them the workers that they need at the wages that they can pay to sustain themselves in the future.
The city of Las Cruces has seen tremendous growth in its downtown area with local businesses. What do you think led to that success, and what do you think that success can perhaps show other communities within the 2nd District on what's possible?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I served on the Downtown Las Cruces Partnership Board when we were just envisioning what the Las Cruces Plaza might look like, and I remember thinking that our motto at that time was, if we build it, they will come. And we were talking specifically about the infrastructure. You know, the redesigned streetscape that allows for pedestrian-friendly transportation, bicycle transportation, slows traffic down, and then creates a sense of belonging in a community, then attracts the businesses to come in, right? And of course, it's become now the hub of Las Cruces that we are all so proud. Our national annual chili drop, right, is one of our big events. The Salsa Fest, any number of things that are happening downtown at any time is a source of pride for us, and that attracts businesses because that attracts people. So infrastructure is key. When we built that and we created the tax increment development district that allowed those local taxpayers to pay directly into a fund that helps support the redevelopment of the infrastructure and the streetscape there, we created a successful environment for small businesses. The infrastructure, the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill will bring those dollars into New Mexico to communities like Carlsbad and to Hobbs, Las Cruces, Deming, so that we can continue to improve the infrastructure. Because if you don't have the adequate water pressure, if you don't have safe streets, if you don't have safe communities, if you don't have good public transportation, it's going to be hard to attract small businesses. It's going to be hard to attract investment that'll come into your community. So that's why downtown was so successful. We built the platform as a local government, working with our state legislators, and then the private industry said, this is where we want to do business.
In New Mexico and throughout much of the Southwest, water is so key to economic development and so much with what we do here. What are some things that you think federal lawmakers need to address with the water issue in our region? I know this is obviously an issue that's very dear to your heart, so I'd like to hear from you.
It is, and I was just meeting with Elephant Butte Irrigation District officials. In fact, we went up to Elephant Butte Dam and we looked at the water levels in the dwindling Rio Grande. We looked at the hydroelectric power generation that is honestly in danger of being able to generate enough power just because our water levels have been so low. But we have, of course, a history of farming and agriculture here in the valley that we don't want to lose. I think looking at what's going to happen with the Texas versus New Mexico Rio Grande settlement case and the agreement that Texas and New Mexico have tentatively come to, the federal government, I think, when two states come together and say this is what we need for water conservation in the valley and to support our growers and to support our economies and to support growing cities like Las Cruces, I think they should accept that, right? And right now, I think we're having some issues with the federal government saying that they're looking for more in restitution from New Mexico to the state of Texas. Look, water conservation efforts are so critically important. We've just seen that the town of Truth or Consequences there is losing nearly 50% of its municipal water to leaky pipes. You talk about infrastructure, those are, I mean, hundreds of thousands of gallons a year. We've done something similar in Las Cruces with smart meters, where now we can detect leaks either at the hookup, you know, on the private side or on the public side. And then we can send technicians out there, and people don't like it, but to dig up the dirt a little bit, get those leaks fixed. I mean, that's going to be critically important because our municipal water use is exploding here in the city of Las Cruces. We also have to talk about the retirement of farmlands, you know, and I know that's something that people don't want to talk about, but I think it's a necessary part of this equation. And also growing, you know, less water-intensive crops in our valleys and understanding how we can do that, how we can support farmers to do that is critically important. So without the Rio Grande, you know, we have not much in this community. It's our lifeblood.
Over the last year, a lot of folks in the district have faced an increase in higher energy prices. Mm-hmm. Can you share with us a little bit about what you think Congress needs to look at in helping alleviate that burden?
Yeah, look, and I'm looking forward to working with our energy industry, in particular in the Permian Basin, to figure out what role we play. What role does New Mexico play in lowering those gas prices? Now, I can tell you that there's plenty of unleased or leased federal lands that are not put into production currently that could help spur our domestic production. Now, sometimes that doesn't help the companies that are producing energy, because if they overproduce or if they produce and lower their prices, then they actually make less money than they would if they keep their stockpiles at much smaller levels. And so we have to have conversations about with these companies about what's the best for the American people. You can still make a profit, you can lower energy costs, and so domestic energy production is something I support, but we can't hold the American public hostage for the sake of making profit and putting money into stockholders' pockets in places like Texas. Right? Here in New Mexico, we really feel that price at the pump. So we need to work with them to make sure that they are producing adequately, that they're part of the solution and not part of the price gouging that we've seen and record profits for oil and gas companies. So we need to get that in check.
So what do you think the future of oil and gas looks like in New Mexico?
Yeah, I think it has a bright future, and I think we've seen that, right? We've seen record oil and gas production and profits in the Permian Basin. Of course, our communities like Hobbs and Carlsbad that greatly benefit from them, they're not stopping anytime soon. Especially the leases that they have on federal land are long leases, 10-year leases in some cases and even more. And so those folks will continue to produce. They have some of the most competitive rates here in New Mexico. If you go to Texas, they're charging $23 to lease an acre of land for oil and gas. Here, we're still charging below market prices compared to almost anywhere else in the country. So I think production will be something that we have that we will have here in the future. I think what I'm interested in is the environmental protection that comes with oil and gas production, is making sure that we're capturing methane, that we're reducing the leaks and the flares, or completely eliminating of methane gas, because not only are we wasting money, those are taxpayer dollars being burnt up in the air, but also we're impacting the health of those communities that do suffer from accelerated rates of respiratory diseases. And just lately, we've seen Congress, when we've seen Senator Lujan have to allocate billions of dollars to clean up abandoned oil and gas wells. So those aren't the companies cleaning up after themselves. That's me and you. Those are the taxpayers of New Mexico saying, now we will clean up that mess, because if we don't, it poses a danger to our water table. It continues to emit dangerous toxins into the air. So those are some regulatory pieces that we need to make sure we have in place in the Permian Basin while production is happening.
Conservation, obviously a big concern of yours. You founded an organization that connects border communities to public lands. Yes. Can you share with us a little bit about how that experience has impacted your view of our public lands and conservation efforts within our region?
Absolutely. I think conservation is the wise use of natural resources, right? I see it as a human endeavor that when we interact with landscapes, when we use water, when we harvest wildlife, when we pull natural resources out of the ground, conservation is that duty to make sure that we leave something behind, or leave enough behind for the next generation and the generation after that. Each generation has a role to play in that. And so these young kids that get out here for the first time in Oregon Mountain Desert Peaks National Monument, or that we get to take rafting down the Rio, or fishing for the first time, showing them how to rig up chicken liver on a hook so that they can catch catfish in the Rio. Those are some of the experiences I want to make sure future generations have. And we can't do that if we don't conserve those places. And that includes our water, our federal public lands that play such a huge deal to having intact ecosystems that support things like mule deer and javelina and jaguar and bobcats, all the things that we love about living here. We have to make sure we protect those places and leave something behind for them. So to me, it's very personal. When we talk about energy development, when we talk about economic opportunity from outdoor recreation, to me, it all ties in to my responsibility to leave something behind for the next generation.
We have under 3 minutes left with you, but I want to get your perspective on an issue. You were born and raised in the borderlands. You were at the State of the Union address. You saw reaction from members of Congress when people were talking about the border. Mm-hmm. Can you share with us your perspective about what you think folks in Washington may not understand about our borderland region?
Well, folks that live here understand that we are an interconnected community. the borderland, or the borderplex, Las Cruces, El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, now San Jerónimo, south of Santa Teresa, it's a mutual benefit to be connected to each other, and oftentimes it's a generational connection that we have. Our families cross across the border. Many of us trace our family origins back to Chihuahua or to Ciudad Juarez. That is a source of pride for us. And so when I went down to Santa Teresa with the ambassador of Mexico, Mr. Ken Salazar, just recently, I said, Ken, this is what I want people to think about the future of the border. A growing international economic region that supports a good relationship with Mexico, where we can bring in the best of the best talent and likewise also have good relationships where we're exporting goods to Mexico. And I think that's the future. We need to make sure that lawmakers in Washington, D.C. truly understand what border communities, how they operate, the relationships that we have, not just economic, but also cultural relationships, and we need to harness those. And I think when we work well with our southern neighbors in Mexico, we're going to be able to create better immigration policy, because immigration reform isn't just going to happen on our side. It also has to happen not just in Mexico, but in those southern counties, southern countries in Central America and South America as well. So it benefits us to have a good relationship with them. And the way some people talk about the border in Washington, D.C., honestly downright makes me angry, because it's not the community that I know.
Where are the areas of opportunity that we have with Mexico to develop and strengthen that relationship? It's already viewed as strong by many, but where are the opportunities to grow that?
I think the opportunities are in making sure that first and foremost, that on the Mexican side, that we have borders that work in an immigration policy that also works on the Mexican side. Second is, again, promoting that economic development opportunities that we have across the border is really critically important. And then third, look, the solutions that this administration is coming up with, some of which I agree, some of which I don't agree, are making it easier for people to apply for asylum from their countries of origin or from their home countries. I think that's a start in the right direction, because what we don't want to do is create this humanitarian crisis that we've seen at the border, where families are preyed on, where women and children are sleeping on the streets. We have an unruly chaos and unruly mix of immigration enforcement. I think we want to have predictability, and Mexico can be a partner in helping us get there.
Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time. Congressman Vasquez, I want to thank you so much for joining us on Your Legislators.
Thank you, Anthony.
And we want to thank you for joining us on this episode. Remember, you can always keep updated with the latest news at krwg.org. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.